Hello and welcome to Conscious TV. My name is Iain McNay and today our guest is Jonathan Harrison. Hi Jonathan.
Hello Ian.
Jonathan's written two books which I'm going to show you now. We Are All One and Naked Being, Undressing Your Mind, Transforming Your Life, which will obviously cover some of the content of these books during the interview. We're going to talk about the evolution of consciousness, non-duality, and how you integrate non-duality in day-to-day life. So Jonathan, let's start when you were quite young. I think at 6 years old you were telling me earlier that you had quite a profound experience that you didn't actually recognise at the time.
Yeah, a very simple experience, Ian, that I was at primary school in West Sussex, and I just remember a particular day where we had an acorn fight. In those days we were allowed to do that sort of thing. And it was a beautiful hot sunny day and everybody was worn out, so we all lay down on the grass. And when I looked up into the sky, I seemed to connect with this absolute peace and harmony that was evidently there. And I suppose a lot of my journey in life and the experiences that I had have led me back to rediscovering that in a different way. So yeah, it was an experience that I can't forget.
Because you had quite a happy childhood, didn't you, basically?
Yes, I was very lucky compared to most people, as I understand. I had a very good upbringing, loving parents, until I got to the teenage years when my parents divorced, and then life took a different turn, and I looked at the world in a different way and ended up in the music business for a short time.
How did the divorce affect you?
Greatly, because I was a very sensitive and shy child, and it probably took me realistically about 12 years that I can think at this point in time to recover and heal and understand that the healing was not in the fact that I was all right, the healing was in the fact that they were all right, that mum and dad were happier for being apart. So to see them happy was in fact my healing.
So you in one way felt a responsibility that your parents
Bizarrely, yes.
be happy.
I don't think I had much to do with the divorce, but you never know.
And then, yes, you worked as a musician for a time, and then you were telling me that when you were on your honeymoon, actually, shortly after that, in your late 20s, you became very ill.
I did, yes. We went to Africa on honeymoon about 20 years ago with my wife, and came back. We were both ill in Africa, as people often are. Came back, and by the end of that year, some 9 months later, I was diagnosed with ME, eventually. And it was a debilitating illness that really changed my life, transformed the way that I think and the way that I would look at life itself. I really was, came to a point where I very rarely got out of bed. I lost my memory. I was physically sick most days. I couldn't keep food down. The immune system wasn't working properly. And I probably had 2 years of intensive illness, but probably about 15 years of illness related to that.
It's pretty devastating to happen, especially soon after you got married.
Yeah, definitely. I'm very lucky I have an understanding wife. I kind of often think, what would I have done in her shoes? So I'm very grateful. I'm very lucky.
And what worked in the end to help you get out of that situation?
Well, I mentioned before we went to several doctors, and in the end I went to a homeopathic practitioner who prescribed different pills and substances to me, and I looked at diet and I looked at my own mental state, if you like, as well. So a real cleansing occurred for me. It was always like a build up to letting go of stuff.
So it was a cleansing on a physical level, but also on a mental and emotional level.
Yeah, definitely.
Can you talk more about how you felt the cleansing on the mental and the emotional level?
Yeah, in that, again, it was the letting go of the idea of the illness. Like the letting go is such a healing aspect or healing thought, by letting go, it is the healing process. It manifests the healing process. The thought that I am ill is the initial one, poor me, but the actual, when you're ready to let go of the fact or of the idea that you have this illness or this suffering, then that's the doorway to really becoming healthy or healing.
But what do you mean by let go?
Almost you could say now, or I would say now, letting go of the thought that I'm identifying with suffering or holding on to the poor old me. Isn't it terrible how ill I am?
Okay, so you're lying there and you can hardly move and you feel physically sick. And you're saying part of the process was to let go of the identification of the person who's suffering. Is that right?
Yes, and that was within ME, with a severe case where you lose your memory and you are really, to all intents and purposes, empty. That's exactly, I think, what happens, that you do let go. It's almost like you can't take anymore, and so it all shifts away, and you empty out all these negative, detrimental things in your consciousness. They have to. It's almost like deep within you, you know you've got to let go so the illness manifests. It's almost like ME is created for you to heal, rather than it's a disastrous illness. No, it's actually a blessing, I would say.
Really?
Yeah. It's an opportunity to heal. It's an opportunity to grow. And so that's the way I think of it. I don't hate it, or I can talk about it and remember what it was like, and it was pretty unpleasant, but it was a blessing in terms of growing.
And when you were letting go, what did you feel was left?
Well, you could say awareness.
And what do you mean by awareness?
Just pure consciousness, gazing through these eyes into the outer world, if you like, without judgment or definition or any need or desire to have anything.
And what does that feel like? Pure consciousness gazing out through these eyes.
Again, these are only words and we're just trying to get the idea of it. So, in many respects, it feels whole and complete. And yet it lacks the human experience, of course, of personal exchange with friends.
And do you feel a distance then between pure consciousness and the human element or the human being?
No. I think the way I think of it, my perception would be that pure consciousness shines through every single person, through every single brain or mind, and comes out in the world accordingly as to what we've put in its way.
Okay, I'm trying to get more of a feel of this process that you went through, and we could obviously, I think, call it a process as such. So you were letting go. Were you doing any practice to let go, or was it just like a giving up or a surrender? Or
I'd done some meditating very naturally. Just it seemed a very natural thing to do, just to be still. I never learnt anything or was taught anything, but it just seemed sensible. In that building up of, particularly afterwards, doing some sort of meditation and just centering and letting go of all the things, all the stresses that would build up in your week at work, for example. So there were I can't actually say there were specific practices or ideas that I took on board in order to do something or in order to see something. It was more of a direct experience that showed me what to do, or that's how I learnt, rather not from a book or a talk, but from the direct experience of it.
so could we say you were guided somehow? Would that be right? Because when you say direct experience, I'm not quite getting that.
Okay. So here I give a very, very simple example that I can think of. I could say to you, the wind was blowing on my face, And you can imagine what the wind was like blowing on my face. When you feel the wind blowing on your face, you know the direct experience of the wind blowing on your face.
Okay.
I don't know if that means anything, but that's the best example I can give of a direct experience of consciousness, or how it feels, that sort of feeling.
Yeah, it's just that I'm trying to dig here a little bit, because I know for people who are very ill, ME or whatever they do have, it's often very difficult to get out of the suffering of the situation with the illness and find a more, if you like, a more positive approach, or a wider picture to see things.
Okay. Well, I think for me anyway, there's a definitive time the illness was going to last, and there wasn't much I could do. I had to just see it out, or stay with it and try and heal, and be aware of what I ate and what stressed me out, why I was in the state I was, to understand that, to really understand that. And then in the second phase, you've got the building up, or the letting go of the fact that that it's personal, if you like, even though of course it is personal, but the idea that it's personal, that it's just you that has this suffering. Everybody has suffering to some degree. So in sharing that suffering, I think that's one way of letting it go.
So you managed to get away from feeling a victim.
Definitely.
Yeah.
There's definitely a time, I think, if you go through that process of the natural healing or the illness itself, when that first phase is coming to an end, coming to a close, there's a second phase of analysing, if you like. Why was I ill? You know, at the time you're ill, you don't go into why am I ill. You're just angry, you're ill and confused, particularly with ME. But I think in the secondary phase, it's a process of inquiry, or it was for me. Who is the I that is ill? Who was the person that was ill? Why were they feeling ill? What could I do to stop feeling ill if I was, am I this body? And looking into these questions were important for me.
Yeah, well, there's different elements there with your questions, because you, on the one half, who am I who is feeling ill? And then there's also, well, what can be done in a practical way? And I know you mentioned at the beginning you went to homeopath and you learnt about diet, and they presumably gave you homeopathic remedies, and learnt about lifestyle. So there are different levels of exploration there, aren't there?
I think generally, though, just an expanse of awareness. So from the illness, looking at a wider, in a more holistic way, as a mind, body, spirit, or all the different possibilities, all the different things that pushed you into that situation, and all the ways out, not just one way out of that illness. Each person, I'm sure, can find a way out of ME. I'm absolutely sure in my heart. But it has to be their way. And that's the most difficult, courageous and challenging way, of course. So for each person it's equally difficult, because it's their struggle. But I think it's possible, my experience tells me, it's definitely possible to recover from severe case of ME.
Good. Okay, then you were recovering, and you went through a period which we don't have to go into details of particularly, but you had premonitions and trance states, so a lot of unusual psychic things were happening. Well, I say unusual, actually, I think there's far more people have these kind of experiences than are usually acknowledged. But then something really significant happened where you left your body. Talk about that.
Yeah, that was, now I've got to think when that was, 2007, I think. I think it was 2007. Or was it 2002?
It doesn't matter.
I can't remember. But anyway, I remember it happening, and the process was such that it was 2007. Right, okay. The process was for me that my wife and I put our kids in bed. We were living in rural France, and had a little centre for healing and awareness for people to come and stay and regenerate and talk about stuff and just heal and chill out and get better. And we'd been working really hard. We had a huge place. There were loads of buildings, and rather than have lots of builders and all the expense of that as well, we were doing a lot of the work ourselves. And quite frankly, we were probably worn out at that point. But nevertheless, I was driven. I had to help, do something to help people. I remember this Saturday night, we just sat down watching telly, relaxing, and I just got up and felt very strange and fell to the floor. So my wife, obviously, she got up as well and tried to, are you all right, trying to pull me up. And I said, yeah, I'm a bit embarrassed, really, because I've never experienced anything like that before. I got up again, and I was going to the loo, to be honest, because I thought I'd get myself together and get sorted out. And as I walked into the loo, I collapsed again. And I really collapsed. It was a narrow little toilet. I hit the wall, bang. And the best thing I can say to you, and it was like a seizure of something, more seizure of consciousness than anything else. But I knew it was coming. That was the interesting thing. I had this sense, I told my wife, this mystical death or something was coming a couple of weeks before. Had no idea what I was talking about or what it was. But fell to the floor, and obviously my wife ran over and a separation occurred. So my wife was here holding me, or holding this body, and after a few seconds, the best way I can explain it is that all the panic and all the human body orientated consciousness started to freak out or panic and stress, because what was happening was there was this separation occurring between consciousness and the body, but I didn't know that at the time. So this panic, what's happening, this approaching idea of death was what was coming over me. And a separation occurred, like I say, to the fact that there's no beautiful story of angels or crystals or new worlds, but the fact that I knew without doubt that this body was not this consciousness. There was a separation, and I knew in those few minutes, it was a very short few minutes, that I was looking down at a body going, oh, that's the body. This is me. Me is this bit. Me is this bit behind the eyes that I'm looking at.
You could look down and see your own body.
Very much so. My wife was crying. I could see that. And she was holding me, and I'm looking down. And then I went into a perfect state of peace, which was so beautiful that it felt very comfortable. And it felt so comfortable that the idea of actually staying in it or leaving was a very attractive one, until I looked down at my wife and realised that she was in a real... it wasn't about me, it was about the state that she was in. Yes. She was absolutely devastated. She was crying her eyes out, trying to resuscitate me to get me to come round, didn't know what to do, and I could feel all this stuff coming from her. I was very much aware of the suffering she was going through. So within that short space of time, there was a reconnection for me with the body to basically come and support my wife rather than anything else. Her fear of being left alone with 2 young children, living in the world, diddly-do, all these kind of things. So what really drew me back was the attention to her.
And when you got back and you came round, and a day or two later, whatever, that must have been a big realisation, because you knew you weren't just a body. You knew.
Direct experience. When we were talking about direct experience earlier, that's, to me, what I call direct experience. Before, I would think and sense and intuit that consciousness and the body, or the I that's me, truly me, the essential I, was not this body. But I didn't really know until I had the experience, the direct experience, and that's the difference for me. I'm so stupid that I need to have a direct experience. Many people can read it and watch this TV program and get it, and they don't have to go through these things. So I think some stubborn people like myself need to go through these things to really learn, and then you can speak up about it and share it.
But how did that affect the way you saw life?
Oh well, that was the big change. There've been several transformations in my consciousness that I'm aware of, but that was probably obviously the biggest one, because fear dissolved. The idea of life and death, or the idea that I was going to die, because I so closely assimilated the experience, it didn't actually bother me anymore. The idea of death.
Because you knew you weren't the body.
Yeah. So, and in a way now the question is a bit strange, because there's part, we'll talk about this as we go along, but there's part of you obviously that lives and dies, and there's part of you that's unborn and infinite. So it's kind of paradox.
So in a way it was kind of another angle, like you had when you had the ME. You could see at one level again, you weren't just the body. This is another way of having the same realisation.
Yeah. Very true.
So I was looking at my notes here to get this all in sequence, and then shortly after that you actually wrote your first book, We Are All One.
Yes.
And you wrote this in 6 days.
I did. I can tell you, carrying on from that collapse on the floor, the following, we were up till about 3 o'clock of the night, and what happened was, I really went from what I would say pure consciousness, virtually, back down to me, and I dropped through what appeared to me as if were levels of consciousness, or layers would be a better word. So I dropped down through levels of consciousness, from universal or from no me to me again. But of course, once I'd done that, again, it was a direct experience. I couldn't forget it. So the following day, I remember my wife and I were just talking about, that was a bit weird last night, you know. She said, I was worried you're going to die, etc., etc. And we just got ourselves together on that next day, because we were both in shock. She said, do you need to go to the hospital? I said, no, I'm not going to die. I know I'm not going to die. I knew I wasn't going to die. This was the other interesting thing. I had a sense of when I was going to die. And a greater clarity about what my life was about, perhaps. But that's a whole new story, but let's not go into that. But the idea of dropping down through these layers of consciousness, having a day where we just got together, and then 6 days following that, she left me in a little room I had upstairs with my computer, and I wrote the book. And for 6 days, my wife and kids left me alone. And I remember my kids, what are you doing, Dad? You know, I was like, I'm just writing this down. And Wendy was kind of explaining to them what Daddy was doing upstairs, locked away in a room. But it was just such a shocking experience. But also the book, in a way, was a healing experience. And I hope that that's something people find if they read it, that sharing that healing experience of there's more to us than meets the eye.
Well, there certainly is, absolutely. And then you were telling me you actually then had what you called extended states of feeling non-duality, oneness. So how, just talk about that. How did that come about, and how did that feel?
Well, it kind of appeared, you know. You can't really say you did anything to have or to be in that, we wouldn't call it a state, whatever, but that experience that I can remember as an experience, because it's something I came back out of. So I just remember things like everything was absolutely one. There was a point, no me, I was dissolved into all that is, into the universe, into all things. I was absolutely peaceful and at one with everything, and I could see life, the life that I was, in everything as well. So it's kind of like a paradoxical reflection. You would see it. I remember looking at a gnarled tree base, and I looked at it and I was just absolutely amazed, and that one experience set me off for weeks. Just looking at this old tree that was gnarled, and I looked at it and thought, yeah, but what is it? And as I went into the idea of what the tree was and contemplated it, I seemed to dissolve into the tree and everything else. And I believe that's an experience we can choose to live in, choose to acknowledge, or choose to use on the right occasion, according to your needs.
And that obviously seemed completely natural to you at the time. Was there any element of surprise this was happening?
No,
or?
not after that experience.
Yes.
There's no.
Yeah.
There was, because all the fear, not just the fear of death, but fear of an experience is gone.
So
Fear
that's
of
right.
change.
That's right. That would be a resistance to things opening up. The fear.
It's just
Yeah.
it's more like a flower opening up. Oh, wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Beauty rather than fear or mind orientated.
So, how does feeling you're one with everything, how does that affect day-to-day life?
Well, I think it fluctuates. I think that from my experiences, I always remember. For me, it's more of a remembrance and an awareness. When my mind is still, then I'm totally aware of that oneness with all things. When I have things to do, my mind comes and says, I've got to go and work on the computer, or I've got to go do this, or we've got to go and pick up the kids, or we've got to arrange lunch for X people, or whatever it is. Then there's a different process. There's a cerebral process that takes place. And I see that as a good thing, to use my brain, to use individual consciousness, that I would call it, to organise your day in a skillful way, to use your gifts. Because I don't believe we're one or the other. I believe we're all these things. We are pure consciousness and we are individual consciousness. And we have potential, I believe, to stretch consciousness between those two poles. And if we do that, we are talking about going into a new dimension of how we live and how we think and how we do things, and restructuring society as a whole. So it's a whole different story.
It sounds like there's an appropriate action emerges when it's needed.
I would say so. But always from that centre point. The recognition that I'm looking at another version, in an abstract way, I'm looking at another version of me. You're looking at another version of you. Words are being used to exchange a story, but essentially that everything is one and there is only one consciousness. That's my experience that I can't forget. So therefore it's underlying all those experiences. And when the experiences drop away, it's there.
And what happens to emotions?
Good point. Really good point, because this is something I wanted to talk about with the non-dual space, which is this the topic we could talk about where there is no personality, whereas I'm gone, there is no me, there is no persona. That's what we call a kind of radical version of non-duality. I think it's a very real and true experience. Somebody in it would say, well, it's not an experience. But I would say when you come out of it, you realise it to be an experience. So, and you would come out of it, as I would, as a father and a husband and somebody at work, to do various things, to go shopping. Do I need to be conscious that I am spirit to go shopping? No, I just need to get in the car, get the old legs going, turn the car on, remember my money. Spirit has no need of money. Non-duality doesn't, in its essence, doesn't recognise these things. Pure consciousness doesn't recognise these things. It's us.
But what happens, like, do you still get angry?
Yeah, I can get angry. I get less angry, and I'm more likely to get angry about things that appear to be ignorant of others, if that makes any sense.
But why would you get angry when you realise that you are connected to everything?
Because I'm a human being, and I celebrate the fact that I am a human being. I celebrate the fact that I can laugh. I celebrate the fact that I can get angry, providing it's not a directed thing. Angry in a protective way as a parent. I'm sure you can understand that. Where you lash out to stop something happening, or for the security of somebody, of a child.
So it's anger as a response, which just goes. It's not something that I am angry at you and you're.
I could see myself doing that many years ago, but I suppose that's a question you'd have to ask my family. But I'm not conscious that I'm going around wagging my finger and a very cross person at all. And
so what we're saying is that the extremes of your personality have dropped away. Is that correct?
The negatives, I would say, what we could consider to be negative ego, negative aspects of ego, because this is the other point. It's not about the dissolution of ego, it's about the dissolution of the negative aspects of ego.
And was there anything that you did at any time to encourage that dissolution, or did it just happen on its own?
In one sense you could say no, blah, blah, blah. And in the other sense you can say awareness. As your awareness expands and more spaciousness appears in your consciousness, these things become very plain to you. If anger arises, or it's very easy to see yourself for what you are. And so there is some relaxation into the truth of who you are. But this is the other point. The truth of who you are, I believe, in this world, is individual, is Jonathan, is Iain, is this form, that form, but is also the essence that's singular. All those things apply. It's not either or, it's both and growth.
So what we're saying is there's a personal Jonathan and a personal Iain, which is an expression of the oneness. There's a uniqueness about that expression, and that's obviously connected to the oneness.
Yes.
Now, presumably that's evolving. This personal expression is evolving in its own right. Would you see it that way?
In that evolution of consciousness, what's happening as we really expand this awareness of who we are and the potentials of what we can become, I think realistically there's a realisation that 7 billion people nearly by a few months' time that we have on this planet will not leap from duality to non-duality. They will, however, possibly walk onto a stepping stone that acknowledges all these things exist, instead of being one or the other, instead of there being not being switched off from the idea of a sacred essence to life without necessarily having to be involved with the idea of religion.
Okay, we're taking a bit of a jump here. So what you're saying is that for you, the evolution of consciousness includes an evolution of mankind as a whole, where there's more of a realisation for individuals that there's a pivotal point that mankind is coming to. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that seems sensible to me. It makes sense to me, that feeling.
Okay, and there is certainly, there's certain people. I remember Gangaji, when she was on this program, she talked about the time of the ordinary awakening, and I think that's probably happening more and more. And used to be, when I first started to meditate many years ago, somehow I didn't really know what enlightenment was. Maybe I still don't know, but I had this idea anyway that it's something that happens to a sage who lives in a cave in the Himalayas for 30 years or something, and it's something very rare. When it happens, it's incredibly special. But it does seem, and I think we use the words now more awakening, realisation, that it's more down to earth. You don't have to go and live in a cave for 30 years. It's actually happening more than we realise, and it's as you were saying, you get, I forget your exact words, but in my interpretation of your words, you get the clues as you go along, and it's either you follow them or you don't, and somehow those openings are happening for all of us, and it's a question really of just realising that they're there.
Yeah, I think that's it, Iain, that these things are happening all the time, every single minute actually, I think, when we're really aware, but particularly throughout any day, there'll be opportunities, windows where you can expand your awareness. And if that means sitting on a bench looking at a tree, if you're lucky enough to do so, then so be it. If it means the way you deal with your family or those you love or your friends about you, then so be it. It's whatever it is. It's your own choice to accept growth or not.
I'm just picking up again on the notes I made beforehand that you were saying that in late 2007 all your mystical phenomena stopped, and you concluded, I was not separate and yet I was separate. And I think you did touch on that a few minutes ago. But that quite intrigues me. Can you talk more about that? You're separate and you're not separate at the same time.
Yeah, well, we could go to the dual and non-dual explanation. That's one of them. So if duality is here and non-duality was here, just in lateral thinking, in Aristotelian logic, they could be poles apart, for example. Let's say they are. Let's say that being in duality, I cannot imagine non-duality. And being really in the non-dual experience, I cannot experience duality.
But when you're in duality, you're not completely unaware of non-duality, are you?
No. That you're in an intellectual way or in a cerebral way?
I would say in a practical way.
Okay. Oh, you're talking about the convergence rather than...
Well, I'm talking about, you talk about that when you're, there's practical things to be done, that you do them.
Yeah.
And appropriateness arises.
Yeah.
And that you could say that you were living in a dual way. You were very busy in the world.
I'm with you. That's why I was just going to bring those two together and say that I hate the word transcending or transcendent, but there are not very good words for it. What is it in us that can see the dual and the non-dual? If I am neither dual or non-dual, or I am both, what is it that sees that? This is what interests me. I know from my experience and thought pattern that I am a dual being, clearly, but I know that I'm a non-dual entity, or that my essence, which is your essence, and everybody's essence, is non-dual, is one, is unified absolutely. So I'm aware of these two. So what does that make me? I don't know, one dual? I don't know. I've kind of lost the title so much as to what that makes me, because I am dual, but I am non-dual. So I'm all these things converged. Yes. So it's more of a holistic consciousness that is a stepping stone to transcend, going backwards and forwards from ignorance and enlightenment, ego, non-ego. Forget about all that. There's my feeling. Forget about it.
What I'm trying to understand more is that when you are living in the world, and we can say you're living more a dual life, how does the non-dual impact you? How does it affect you?
Because it's the heart of who you are.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but practically, is there an awareness of practically how that affects you? In terms of how you live your life?
Obviously, the personal desire in terms of me is greatly diminished from your experiences. For me personally, my understanding is that I gave or surrendered, gave into life. So I follow life as I'm supposed to live it. If that makes any sense at all. I feel that we were talking about this the other day with some friends, and it was almost like, the salmon struggling up the river to go, I'm going to go and, lay me eggs and breed, and struggling up, jumping to the top of this river. Well, I feel like now I'm a salmon going that way down the river, and it's okay. The river's supports the whole universe. I look at a star in the night sky, it's amazing. What's it doing there? How's it staying there? Same thing supporting me and you and everybody else. And if we trust in that and let go, I think some wonderful things happen, and some real truths, universal truths, great truths appear in our everyday lives, and they can help us grow, help us heal, and help others in the same way.
So you wrote this book, Naked Being, Undressing Your Mind, Transforming Your Life. And it's more, I was looking through it last night, is 450, I wouldn't call them statements, but wouldn't call them phrases, but 450 few words.
Aphorisms or whatever, little passages.
Yeah. So what was the process of writing that book?
The process of writing that book for me was to put it as simply as I could for myself and others, so that I could read it and understand it. And also, in the actual writing of the book, right towards the end, this transition from this convergence started to appear, what I call wholeness of being. Wholeness of being is this, say, holistic consciousness that is aware of all that we are, so that we're transient. We're able to use these things in a positive way. Ego is transformed to a positive entity, in that it's relatively selfless. It doesn't have to be completely selfless. Maybe we're not all here to be completely selfless, but maybe we're all here with an opportunity to realise the essence of who we are and how that helping each other makes us feel good. Why is that? Why do I feel good when I help somebody? Because I'm in contact with what I am. And those really simple things we can all do. Let the lady sit down on the bus, whatever it is. All these little things are just reflections of who we are, and we can feel it. It's not like somebody tells us that was a good thing. We feel, I'm in connection with who I am, and there's not even a thought process going on.
So it's not that we give our seat up on the bus only because we feel it is the right thing to do, but it's because it's an appropriate thing to do in that moment. Is that right?
Yeah. There might be a time where it's not.
Yeah.
I don't know. Well, you might have had an operation yourself and need to sit there and, I don't know. But you know what I'm saying? That sense is how it is for me. Is more to do with transformation of ego rather than dissolution of ego. Dissolution of ego, when you've got a young family, is quite a difficult thing and not a very practical thing. And I suggest for most people in the world, dissolution of ego is going to be problematic on a daily basis.
This is something that I remember because myself, I've had different spiritual paths and I followed a couple of gurus for a time, and it was very, not at the same time, at different times, and it was very much about the ego's the enemy, and you need to dissolve it or get rid of the ego and be yourself. And I found it a very confusing process, and it very much now I feel that ego actually is my best friend insofar as if I look at it, it gives me so many clues that can take me down to deeper levels of who I really am. It's not something to try and get rid of, it's something to understand and explore.
And then perhaps the other way I look at it, Ian, is with, I remember we used to have homogenised milk, where the fat and the full milk were all mixed together as a unified one. Look at it that way, the fat on the top, which was the ego that you always thought you were, the self-desiring, negative and positive ego, if you like, mixed up, was this full fat. And I think in that process of transformation, the ego, it doesn't just die or is burnt away. Maybe it does for some great, wise, sage gurus. I don't know. That's not the practical way forward to me. But maybe it gets homogenized with all that it is, so that the ego can be an outlet for the heart. Rather than...
No, I understand that, yeah. It's interesting, before we made this programme, we had a programme in our series on the Enneagram, and the Enneagram, very briefly, for people that don't know, is 9 different personality types, and we're all basically essentially one type, although we obviously have other types in us as well. And it was very much because the 8s are very forceful, they're very domineering, and they very much come to the same conclusion that ultimately their role was to be, in a way, in service of humanity, to realise who they really were. And it wasn't then that their personality disappeared at all, but it was like the positive side of being a type 8 came out rather than the stubborn, domineering side. They could still be strong and great leaders, but they did it with understanding and compassion. And this does seem very much the modern way, if you like, a relatively modern way of how we move forward as human beings.
That's that stepping stone we're talking about, is that realisation that it's not extremes anymore. It's about this convergence of the two and an overseeing of everything we are to use it for the betterment of ourselves and others.
Is there a time when you lose touch with who you really are, with the oneness?
I don't think there is. I think that I know even when I'm in the post office buying stamps, underneath that I know there is the essential consciousness that there is within all things, within all people. So when I see people, I see that as well.
So if there's a long queue in the post office and your
That doesn't
car's
bother
on the meter and it's about to expire, you can keep this space, or you
Yeah.
don't lose
I
it.
think I wouldn't. It wouldn't. Well, fortunately, I don't have meters where I am, so just the queue wouldn't bother me. It would say, I'm supposed to be in the queue. It's all right. I'm going to learn something in a minute, and maybe it's all about learning while we're here. And
So, Jonathan, you've had experiences that have been very palpable, in some ways quite dramatic, especially when you left your body, and quite extreme when you had that illness for many years. And they were your teachers, or they were very strong pointers to
Yeah.
who you really are. What would you say to people that feel they haven't had such clear experiences? What would you say to them as a way forward in terms of finding this place that you've found?
Firstly, I suppose that the place that I've found is the place that I've found for me, and they're going to find a slightly different place.
Yes.
Nevertheless, I believe it'll all point back to the same thing eventually, to the one essential consciousness that we all are. So for them is to follow, do their own work, I think, to do their own clarity, to get rid of stuff that is constantly in their minds, to heal themselves, to let go of obviously conditioning, all these things. Create space in your consciousness. When something arises, then you can look at it with the realisation it's not who you are, it's a thought. You are what's behind the thought. You are the canvas. You are pure consciousness in one aspect. So what is coming in? Is that a positive thing? Is that a negative thing? And to follow your heart, I think, with an ever-expanding consciousness, I suppose that there's no end. It's an infinite thing. It's the old onion layers. There's not a definitive point. You're here as a human being to learn in this life. I really believe that. And if you really want to search and find things, you will. But to be led by the truth of who you are, I think that's probably important, or at least it was for me, to search for truth.
To search for truth.
To search for truth and to feel it resounding within myself without knowing, in my mind whether that was true or false, but the absolute feeling of the roses, the wind on your face. Oh yeah, I can't deny that. That's true. May not be what I want to do, but it would be truth. Or it would be a deeper truth than my individual consciousness would maybe want to admit. But nevertheless, it's there. And I should take note of those things if I want to learn. I think we can all teach ourselves, you see. So I think we're our own best teachers in many ways. We know our lessons, even if we've not had them all yet. They're all coming. They're all going to appear, and we're going to have to deal with them. You won't necessarily have somebody with you when you have to deal with it. It'll be your own thoughts you have to deal with, not anything else.
I know you work at Gaunt's house now, which is it Dorset?
It's in Dorset.
Yes, yeah. And what are the biggest stumbling blocks people have that you work with in terms of their daily life?
Well, I suppose at Gaunt's we've got a whole range of workshops and retreats. And I suppose the most common thing is that people have only got so much time, only got so much money to attend these things. But I suppose my answer to that would be, which would be not a commercial answer, would be doing your own work at home every day. Just having a few minutes, dwelling in, touching your centre, the truth of who you are, and being in contact with that and allowing it to grow and to dominate, to become bigger and bigger, to dominate your consciousness in a positive way, to allow that expansion, to allow yourself time, allow yourself space. Fortunately, we're at Gaunt's, we've got 2,000 acres of space, so it's probably an easy thing for me to say and not so easy in London. But, to have space in time, just a few minutes in your flat in London, that's a good thing. If you can get out to the country and be in nature, brilliant thing. Really fantastic. Touching all these things and feeling who we are, essentially, I think is the key to the transformation of consciousness.
Yeah, it is a question of time, and it is so important that people make the commitment. You're absolutely right. Unless you make this commitment, then you're probably going to struggle.
And it's always that I always thought for me, it's that thing about the when you're sort of hoovering the lounge and there's a rug, or in the old days we were sweeping, weren't we? You're sweeping it and you think, oh, nobody's looking. I'll put it under the rug and I'll go off. And of course, eventually you got to go back. So I would say, get rid of the rug, hoover it up, put the rug back. In terms of what's going on here for each one of us. Don't deny the truth of what arises in your consciousness. I think if you do that, you will see with greater clarity. And we can learn more efficiently that way and touch the essence of who we all are, rather than who I am, just me. So that, being in contact or having some reference to a singular consciousness is fundamental at some point. Not just about one of us. It's about all of us together trying to create something, trying to sustain a way out of the present chaos, I would say, that the world is in and that humanity's consciousness is in.
And do you feel humanity is coming more together?
Well, you could say that. There's a sense of that in consciousness, but then you've only got to watch the news to think, well...
There's a lot of conflict, but there always has been.
There always has been. There's a sense of a definite movement this year for some... I don't want to get into dates and all that kind of thing, but this year, 2011, there seems to have been some sort of shift that I could feel, and I think probably locked in with what was going on in the world, on the news. There were some people all over the Middle East, aren't saying freedom, liberation. You think, well, this potentially is interesting. This is potentially something to build on, or some awareness is growing. But I certainly think in the Western world, where materialism, we can begin to see that materialism really doesn't work. It's not going to sustain us. We're in a position of looking at something in a deeper, more profound way, and using all that we are, including our brains and our individual positive egos, to sort it out, to find stepping stones, and to go beyond this relentless, as I said before, sort of poles of thinking that we get stuck on. That,
I think we're going to finish there. It's a good place to finish.
Thank you.
I appreciate you coming in, Jonathan.
Thank you.
I'm just going to show you books again. So, Naked Being, Undressing Your Mind, Transforming Your Life. And We Are All One, A Call to Spiritual Uprising. You're talking about uprisings in various countries. You're talking about a spiritual uprising. And I guess they're all connected. So, thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, everyone out there, for watching Conscious TV. And I hope we see you again soon. Goodbye.